The clinking of champagne glasses echoed through the grand ballroom, crystal chandeliers showering the room in gold as laughter and chatter swirled around us. I stood there, Camilla's hand lightly resting on my arm, a smile fixed to my face that didn't quite reach my eyes. It was our wedding day, the day I was supposed to feel like the luckiest man alive. I thought I did. Until Gregory Vaughn, my new father-in-law, rose from his seat at the head table, his Rolex glinting under the lights, and raised his glass high above his head. "To my daughter," Gregory announced, his voice slicing through the murmur of the crowd like a blade. "And her new husband. He may not be a real man, just a broke loser, but hey, love makes fools of us all." The room erupted into laughter. Not the awkward, uncomfortable kind. This was cruel, full-bellied, slap-the-table laughter. My heart thudded so loudly in my chest that it drowned out everything else. For a moment, I could almost pretend I hadn't heard him right, that maybe I was imagining it. But then I saw Camilla, my wife, lean toward the microphone with a twinkle in her eye and a conspiratorial smirk. "He's lucky I even said yes," she giggled, and the crowd clapped, cheered, hooted like we were the punchline at some sick comedy show. I stood there, frozen, every muscle locked in place, my face burning hotter than the sun overhead. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. I felt every pair of eyes in that room trained on me, drinking in my humiliation like fine wine. Even the waitstaff paused, pretending to adjust trays to catch the show. My vision tunneled, my mind screaming for an escape, for some way to turn back the clock and undo all of it. The proposals, the wedding planning, the long night spent worrying about whether her family would ever accept me. My skin prickled under the expensive fabric of the suit I could barely afford. And then I heard it, the scrape of a chair against the marble floor, sharp and jarring in the suffocating air. Aiden. I turned just in time to see my little brother, barely 14, standing up from the tiny table in the back where my family had been quietly hiding. His hand shook as he fumbled with a piece of folded paper, his voice trembling as he spoke. "He wanted me to read this letter," Aiden said, his voice cracking but steadying as he unfolded the page, "if they ever disrespected him." The laughter died instantly. It didn't taper off, it stopped, like someone had slammed a fist onto the mute button of the whole event. You could hear the pop of the champagne cork across the room. Camilla's smile faltered. Gregory's smug expression stiffened, his glass halfway to his mouth. Celeste Vaughn, sitting primly beside him, blinked in confusion, her thin fingers clenching the pearl necklace at her throat. Aiden's voice wavered at first, but with every word, he found his strength, like a boxer who took a few punches and decided he wasn't going down today. He read my words. The ones we had written together months ago, back when I feared this exact nightmare could become reality. He spoke of how I stocked shelves after school at 12 years old while other kids played video games. Of how our mother worked 2 cleaning jobs to keep the lights on, and how I skipped prom so I could afford a cap and gown for graduation. He talked about grit, about doing whatever it took not to impress people who looked down on us, but to survive, to live with dignity. The room was so still it felt like we were underwater. No one reached for their drinks. No one dared move. Even the band at the corner of the room sat frozen, instruments slack in their hands. My mother, Teresa, wiped her eyes with a cocktail napkin, her lips trembling with a pride that no money could buy. Camilla stared at me across the polished wood of the head table. Her perfect lips parted slightly, like she wanted to say something but didn't know what. Maybe for the first time in her life, she was at a loss. When Aiden finished, he stood there, letter dangling from his fingers, his chest rising and falling rapidly, like he had run a marathon in place. He looked so small under those massive chandeliers, dwarfed by the sheer opulence of the room. But to me, he was 10 feet tall. My hands unclenched slowly. My heart, still hammering against my ribs, began to steady. I drew in a deep breath, the kind that comes before a decision you can't take back. The kind that makes you who you really are. I turned to Camilla, the woman in the designer dress. The woman whose diamond wedding band gleamed under the lights. The woman who laughed when I was gutted in front of everyone. The woman who didn't even try to stop it. I could see it all now, the way she looked at me sometimes when she thought I wasn't watching. The way her friends giggled behind manicured hands when I pulled up in my 10-year-old car. The way her father offered her real estate deals instead of marriage advice. I had wanted so badly to belong that I ignored every warning sign. And now? Now I was wide awake. I straightened my jacket, the movement crisp and deliberate. I ran a hand down the front to smooth imaginary wrinkles, more out of instinct than necessity. Then, slowly, I stepped away from the table, the weight of the room pressing against my back like a tidal wave I refused to let crush me. I heard Camilla whisper my name, soft and uncertain, but I didn't turn around. Instead, I walked toward Aiden, toward my mother, toward the only people who never measured my worth in dollar signs or dinner parties. The night wasn't ruined. It was reborn, not as a celebration of love, but as a funeral for the lies I had lived under. And as I placed a steady hand on Aiden's shoulder, meeting his tearful, defiant gaze, I realized something else, something powerful, something freeing. This was the moment I started living for real. The moment I chose myself. And no amount of champagne toasts or snide remarks could ever take that away from me again. I used to think survival was just something you did in emergencies, hurricanes, car crashes, the big dramatic moments that made the news. But for me, for Aiden, and for our mother, survival was a Tuesday afternoon, a grocery store paycheck, a heater that rattled all night but never really warmed the house. It wasn't dramatic. It was just constant. I learned young that life didn't hand you second chances. It handed you bills and responsibilities and people you had to keep alive even when you were barely holding on yourself. Dad was gone before Aiden could even form memories of him. A construction accident, a loose scaffold, a missed warning, and just like that, we were a family of 3. I was 9, old enough to understand that death wasn't something you could fix by crying about it, but too young to really shoulder what came next. Mom tried. God, she tried. She worked double shifts at the diner, then picked up cleaning gigs on the weekends. She smiled for us even when she was bone-tired. She made birthdays special with boxed cakes and dollar store decorations. She gave everything she had. But life wasn't generous in return. By the time I was 11, I was stocking shelves at the corner store after school, shoving crushed boxes into the stockroom, and pretending I didn't notice the way Mr. Delaney slipped a few extra dollars into my paycheck. I knew he felt sorry for me. I didn't care. Pride doesn't feed a family. While other kids played Little League, I memorized prices and stocked inventory. I learned how to count change faster than most cashiers twice my age. I learned to watch Mom's face when she opened bills, to read the tension around her mouth, the furrow between her brows, and know if it was going to be a month of peanut butter sandwiches again. Aiden was just a kid, a messy-haired, wide-eyed little boy who still believed in superheroes and cartoons. I wanted to keep it that way. I worked so he could have his birthday parties at the community center, so he could sign up for soccer even when the registration fee made Mom's hands tremble as she wrote the check. I wanted him to believe, just a little longer, that the world could be good. The first time I saw Camilla Vaughn, it was like stepping into another universe. We were in college, and I was hurrying across campus, late for my 3rd shift of the day, when she walked past me. Designer purse slung casually over one shoulder, nails painted a shade of pink that probably had a name like Cherry Blossom Luxe. She was laughing, not a giggle or a chuckle, but the kind of full, throaty laugh that said she had never once worried about whether she could afford textbooks. I should have kept walking. I should have known better. But she smiled at me. Just once. A flash of perfect white teeth and warm brown eyes that didn't look through me like so many others did. And God help me, I smiled back. It started small: coffee after class, study sessions that turned into late-night talks on the campus lawn. She asked about my family, and I told her, piecemeal, careful not to sound too pathetic. She told me about hers, the Vaughns, and it sounded like something out of a magazine. Summer homes, private jets, charity galas. Gregory Vaughn, real estate king. Celeste Vaughn, queen of the country clubs. I should have run then, too. But Camilla wasn't her parents. At least, that's what I told myself. She didn't seem to care that I couldn't afford fancy dates. She laughed when I took her to food trucks instead of 5-star restaurants. She said she loved my ambition, my drive, my heart. I needed to believe her. Because deep down, I was so tired of surviving. I wanted to live. I wanted to believe that maybe, just maybe, the boy from the broken house and the girl from the mansion on the hill could meet somewhere in the middle and build something real. I worked harder. I took extra shifts. I skipped sleep and meals and moments I should have savored. Also, I could afford a ring that wasn't embarrassing, a proposal that didn't scream desperation. I scrimped and saved and bought a ring with a diamond so small it practically needed a magnifying glass. But when I slipped it onto her finger under the fairy lights at the botanical garden, she cried real tears. Or maybe she just knew how to look like she did. I don't know anymore. Her parents tolerated me the way you tolerate a stain on your favorite shirt, visible, irritating, but not quite bad enough to throw the whole thing away. Gregory made his feelings clear from the first handshake, his grip bone-crushing. his smile shark-like. "And what do you plan to do, son?" he asked at our first dinner, his voice dripping with amusement. "Work hard," I said, because it was the only thing I knew how to do. He chuckled, like I had told a particularly stupid joke. Camilla squeezed my hand under the table. I squeezed back, trying to believe that was enough. It wasn't. By the time wedding planning started, it was obvious who was really calling the shots. Estate venues I couldn't pronounce, let alone afford. Dress fittings that cost more than my entire year's rent. A guest list that read more like a Forbes 500 directory than a celebration of love. I wanted to say something. I wanted to tell Camilla we didn't need all this, that I would marry her in a courthouse with a $2 bouquet and feel just as proud. But every time I tried, she'd smile and say, "It's just what's expected, baby. They'll come around once they see how much you love me." So I swallowed it. I took out loans I couldn't afford, maxed out credit cards, pushed the worry deep into a place I didn't have time to examine. I wanted so badly for it to work. I needed it to. Because if it didn't, if love wasn't enough to bridge the canyon between where I came from and where she lived, then what had all the struggling been for? And now, standing there on our wedding night with a ballroom full of vultures feasting on my humiliation, I realized the truth. Survival wasn't something you outgrew. It was something you either embraced or drowned under. And I had survived too much to drown now. The first time I stepped into the Vaughn estate, I knew I didn't belong. The ceiling soared higher than anything I'd ever seen outside of a cathedral, dripping with chandeliers that must have cost more than my entire college tuition. The floors gleamed, marble so polished you could see your reflection in it, a distorted, smaller version of yourself, reminding you you'd never quite fit in. Gregory Vaughn met me at the door that day, his handshake firm, his eyes harder. He smiled, that thin, wolfish stretch of lips that didn't touch his eyes, and clapped me on the back as if we were old friends. We weren't. We never would be. "Welcome to the family," he said, but it sounded like a warning, not a greeting. From the beginning, expectations wrapped around me like chains. Silent, heavy, and impossible to shake. I wasn't a boyfriend. I wasn't even a fiancé. I was a project. Camilla would smile, squeezing my hand at dinners while Gregory and Celeste picked me apart with genteel precision. "So, you're studying business, huh?" Gregory would ask, his tone oozing disbelief. "At a public university?" Celeste would tilt her head, her diamond earrings catching the light. "How quaint," she'd say, as if my education was a novelty item she might toss into her charity auction basket. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that love was enough, that once they saw how much I cared for Camilla, how hard I was willing to work for her, they'd come around. They didn't. When wedding planning started, it became glaringly obvious that this wasn't just about Camilla and me. It was about a show, a performance for their friends, their colleagues, the high society elite they moved among like royalty. The estate venues were the first battle I lost. Camilla had fallen in love with a particular one, a sprawling vineyard estate perched high in the hills, with a panoramic view of the valley below. It was breathtaking. It was also astronomically expensive. "We deserve the best," she said, her eyes sparkling with excitement. "It's a once-in-a-lifetime event." I wanted to argue. I wanted to tell her that love wasn't measured in acres and panoramic sunsets. But the way she looked at me, hopeful, expectant, silenced the protest before it could leave my throat. Instead, I smiled and said, "Of course." That's when the loans started. Quiet ones. Secret ones. A line of credit here. A deferred payment plan there. I told myself it was temporary. That once I graduated, once I landed a good job, we'd dig ourselves out. When the wedding planners started suggesting champagne towers and fireworks displays, I should have said no. When they presented the bill for the couture dress, a price tag that made my stomach knot, I should have insisted on something simpler, something more real. But every time I opened my mouth, Camilla would flash that dazzling smile, her arms slipping around my neck, her whisper warm in my ear. "Don't worry, baby. It's all taken care of. Daddy's helping." Daddy was helping. But not for me. For the image. For the perfect daughter with the perfect wedding to the man he was convinced was so far beneath her he might as well be crawling. Celeste planned the guest list, carefully editing out anyone who didn't meet her social standards. I fought to keep my mother and Aiden on that list, fought to make sure they weren't shoved into the shadows, embarrassed by table placements and casual snubs. "Of course they'll be invited," Celeste said, waving a manicured hand as if it were an afterthought. "We'll just put them somewhere cozy." Cozy turned out to mean near the service doors, next to the waitstaff entrance. I gritted my teeth and let it happen. Again, and again, and again. Every compromise felt like a small death, but I convinced myself it was for the greater good. For love. The engagement party was another humiliation. Gregory gave a toast then, too. A less vicious one, but the undertones were clear enough. "We're thrilled Camilla found someone who appreciates everything she brings to the table," he said, his glass raised high. "It's not every day a man gets a ticket into this family." The room laughed. I laughed, too, hollow and tight, my arm tight around Camilla's waist. When I caught Aiden's eyes across the room, those big, trusting eyes, I forced a smile. I couldn't let him see me buckle. Not him. Not ever. I was drowning in expectations, drowning in debt, drowning in a love that increasingly felt one-sided, a desperate attempt to prove I was enough for people who had decided long before I ever entered their marble fortress that I would never be good enough. But I clung to the illusion with both hands. Camilla still whispered that she loved me. She still kissed me with a fierceness that felt real. She still laughed at my jokes when we were alone. So I convinced myself it was just the pressure, the wedding stress, the looming future. I didn't see it then. The cracks beneath the surface, spiderwebbing outward with every choice I made to please everyone but myself. I thought once the wedding day arrived, once I stood at the altar with her in front of God and the world, everything would shift. They would see. They would finally see that I was worthy. I didn't realize the only person who needed to believe it, the only person whose opinion truly mattered, was me. And by the time the toast began that night, by the time Gregory's cruel words cut me open in front of everyone, it was already too late. I had traded my pride for acceptance, and in doing so, lost both. The man they laughed at wasn't a stranger. It was me. The version of myself I had bent and broken to fit into a mold I was never meant to occupy. But survival was still stitched into my bones. And as much as it hurt, as much as it bled, I would survive this, too. The morning of the wedding, everything looked perfect. Every detail had been ironed out, every crease smoothed by armies of planners and decorators and assistants dressed in black. The estate gleamed under the early sun, the flower arrangements towering like monuments to some unattainable idea of beauty, of success. The Vaughns knew how to orchestrate a spectacle, and for a few fragile hours, I let myself believe it would all be worth it. Camilla was radiant. That's the only word I can use for it. When she stepped out from behind the white oak doors and started down the aisle, it was like the world narrowed until she was the only thing that existed. Her dress shimmered with thousands of tiny crystals. Her hair cascaded in soft waves over her bare shoulders. Her smile, carefully practiced in mirrors for weeks, looked effortless, beautiful, devastating. My breath caught. Despite everything, the tension, the snide remarks, the doubts clawing at the edges of my mind, in that moment, all I saw was her. All I wanted was her. The vows came and went like a dream. I barely remembered speaking, barely remembered the trembling in my hands when I slipped the ring onto her finger. I just remember thinking, we made it. We had crossed the finish line. It wasn't until we reached the reception that the facade started to crack. Our families were a study in contrasts. On one side of the massive ballroom, the Vaughns held court, laughing too loudly, drinking too much champagne, posing for photos that would no doubt grace the pages of high society magazines. On the other side, tucked away like an afterthought, sat my family, Teresa, Aiden, and two of my mother's sisters who had scraped together the money to make the trip. They looked uncomfortable, out of place, like guests at a party they had accidentally crashed. I caught my mother staring at the chandelier above us, a masterpiece of glass and gold that probably cost more than our entire neighborhood. Her expression was hard to read, but I knew her well enough to recognize the ache behind her smile. She wasn't embarrassed of me. She never had been. But she knew. She had known from the start. This wasn't our world. The first hour of the reception passed in a blur of photographs, endless congratulations from people who had never cared to know my name before today, and speeches that grew more polished and impersonal with each passing glass of wine. I clung to Camilla's side, trying to ground myself, trying to remember why we were here, why any of it mattered. It was the speeches that broke me. It started innocuously enough. Camilla's best friend took the mic, telling charming, sanitized stories about how Camilla had always been destined for greatness, for fairy tales. Then her cousin, some minor socialite, offered a rambling toast that made several not-so-subtle jokes about how lucky I was to have married up. I laughed it off, tightening my grip on Camilla's hand. She smiled at me, but it was brittle around the edges. I should have recognized that smile. And then Gregory stood. The room fell respectfully silent, if only because of the sheer force of his presence. He tapped his glass, cleared his throat, and smiled that slow, predatory smile that had haunted so many of our dinners. "I think it's fair to say," Gregory began, his voice booming with self-satisfaction, "that we all had our doubts." A few polite chuckles rolled through the crowd. "But in the end, what matters is love, right?" he continued, raising his glass. "Love, and perhaps a little bit of luck." His eyes found mine, hard and gleaming. After all, Camilla could have had anyone. She chose love over legacy. More laughter. Louder this time. Less polite. My throat burned. Camilla didn't stop him. She didn't even look upset. She was smiling, not at me, but at the crowd, basking in their attention like a flower leaning toward sunlight. I stood there, stone still, my heart sinking further with every mocking clap, every raised glass. And then she leaned toward the microphone. With a light, effortless giggle, she said, "He's lucky I even said yes." The room roared with approval. And I died 1,000 quiet deaths inside. That was when I heard it, the scrape of a chair, sharp against the marble floor. I turned just as Aiden, sweet, loyal, terrified Aiden, stood up from his seat near the back. He held a piece of paper in his trembling hands. At first, I thought he might back down. The room was a wall of judgment, a monolith of people who would crush him with their disdain without a second thought. But Aiden didn't back down. His voice, shaking but growing steadier with every word, carried through the vast room. "He wanted me to read this," Aiden said, eyes darting to me for a half-second of reassurance, if they ever disrespected him. The laughter faltered. The clapping died. And the room held its breath. I watched, heart pounding, as my brother unfolded the letter we had written together, a secret pact born from a place of fear, of knowing deep down that this day might not be what I hoped it would be. He spoke of our father, the father who never made it home from that construction site. Of our mother, the woman who worked her fingers raw to keep food on the table. He spoke of me, not the polished version, not the social climbing caricature they saw, but the real me. The boy who stocked shelves, who cleaned floors, who carried the weight of a broken family on his back without ever once complaining. He told them about every late night, every early morning, every sacrifice they could never begin to comprehend. He told them who I was. Not a loser. Not a charity case. A survivor. By the time he finished, the room was suffocating in silence. Not a single person raised their glass. Not a single person smiled. Even Camilla sat frozen, her hand slack on the table, her perfect posture wilting under the crushing weight of the truth. And me? I breathed. For the first time that night, maybe for the first time in months, I really breathed. And somewhere deep inside me, something hard and unbreakable clicked into place. I wasn't the one who didn't belong here. They were. Aiden's hands trembled so badly I thought the paper might slip from his fingers, but somehow he held on. Somehow, word after word, he stood tall in front of a crowd that could have devoured him whole. His voice cracked once, just once, when he mentioned our father, but he cleared his throat, gripped the letter tighter, and kept going. Every word he read was a knife, but not aimed at me. It cut through the polished veneers, through the false laughter, through the expensive suits and designer dresses that had once seemed so invincible. It was raw, ugly truth laid bare in a room built to pretend it didn't exist. I watched the faces of the crowd as Aiden spoke. Some shifted uncomfortably, their champagne glasses frozen halfway to their lips. Others looked down at their shoes or their plates, suddenly very interested in anything that wasn't the small boy tearing down the illusion brick by brick. Gregory Vaughn's face darkened, his jaw tightening so hard I thought I might hear it crack. Celeste clutched her pearls, the universal rich woman's signal for I am deeply offended but must maintain appearances. Camilla. Camilla sat perfectly still, her smile gone, her fingers tapping lightly on the table in a rhythm I recognized, the same rhythm she tapped when she was nervous, when she didn't know how to control the room anymore. Good. Let her squirm. Aiden's voice rang out, stronger now, as he finished the last lines we had written together. Respect isn't given based on wealth. It's earned through struggle, through sacrifice, through love that doesn't ask for applause. He never needed your approval to be a real man. And he never will. For a long moment after he finished, silence pressed down on us like a second ceiling. I heard someone cough near the back. A chair creaked. A champagne bottle popped too loudly, the sound startling in the oppressive quiet. And then, nothing. No applause. No laughter. No rebuttal. Just a heavy, stunned silence. Aiden stood there, the letter hanging limp in his hand, his chest rising and falling like he had just sprinted a marathon. His eyes darted to me, full of fear and hope all at once. I stood up slowly. My legs felt heavy, like they weren't used to carrying this much weight, not the physical weight, but the emotional one. I didn't look at Gregory. I didn't look at Celeste. I didn't even look at Camilla. I walked straight to Aiden. I put my hand on his shoulder, squeezing once, a thank you, a promise, 1,000 words I couldn't say aloud right then. And then I turned back to the room. My brother said it better than I ever could, I said, my voice steady in a way I didn't know I was still capable of. So I'll just add this. I know who I am. And I'm proud of it. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't need one. I turned to the table where Camilla sat, her gown pooling around her like spilled champagne, her carefully constructed world crumbling by the second. I reached for my ring. It slid off my finger with surprising ease, the cool metal catching the light for just a moment before I placed it gently, almost tenderly, on the table next to her untouched bouquet. Her eyes widened, a flash of panic breaking through the mask. I leaned in just enough for only her to hear. I loved you, I said, and it was true. God help me, it was true. But I won't spend my life with someone who laughs when I'm being torn apart. And with that, I turned and walked away. No shouting. No dramatics. No pleading for understanding from people who had made it clear they didn't care to offer it. Just a simple, clean exit. Each step felt lighter than the last. The doors loomed ahead, massive, ornate, the kind you needed 2 hands to push open, but they might as well have been the gates to freedom. Behind me, I heard whispers start to rise, scandalized, frantic, trying to piece together the shattered remains of the perfect Vaughn wedding. But I didn't look back. I pushed open the doors, the heavy wood groaning like the final sigh of a dying empire, and stepped out into the cool evening air. Aiden scrambled after me, the letter still clutched in his hand, his suit jacket flapping awkwardly around his too thin frame. He caught up to me just as the doors swung closed behind us, sealing the cacophony inside. For a moment, we just stood there, brothers, survivors, breathing in the night like it was something sacred. The sky was streaked with purples and oranges, the last gasp of a sunset that had burned itself out trying to make something beautiful of the day. I'm sorry, Aiden whispered, his voice small and unsure. I didn't mean to ruin. You didn't ruin anything, I cut him off, pulling him into a rough, one-armed hug. You saved me. And he had. If he hadn't stood up, if he hadn't read that letter, maybe I would have swallowed the humiliation. Maybe I would have convinced myself to stay, to keep surviving under a different kind of weight. But he reminded me who I was. Not Gregory's project. Not Camilla's charity case. Not a man defined by bank accounts or luxury venues. Me. Just me. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. Mom found us sitting on a stone bench near the entrance, her heels dangling from her fingers, her hair a little messy from the night's chaos. She looked at me, really looked, and smiled. Not the strained, polite smile she'd worn all day, but the real one. The one that had carried us through every hard year. She didn't say, I'm proud of you. She didn't have to. I saw it in her eyes. Camilla didn't come after me. Neither did Gregory, or Celeste, or any of the glossy guests still trapped inside their perfect little bubble. A few distant cousins, a few college friends who barely knew me, trickled out as the evening wore on, offering awkward apologies and empty words. But it didn't matter. None of it mattered. I had already left, not just the building, but the life they tried to force me into. I chose myself. And sitting there on that cracked old bench, my mother on one side and my brother on the other, I realized something that made my chest ache in the best possible way. Sometimes the greatest victories don't come with applause. Sometimes they come with silence, a sunset, and the simple, breathtaking relief of finally being free. The weight of the ballroom doors pressed against my back as they closed with a slow, hollow thud, sealing that world inside and sealing me out. I didn't rush. I didn't stumble. I walked with a steady, deliberate pace, each footfall heavier and louder in my ears than the last. For a moment, the cool evening air hit my skin like a baptism, washing off the stink of forced smiles, fake toasts, and all the lies I had been swallowing for months. Freedom wasn't fireworks. It wasn't grand speeches or soaring music. It was the simple, terrifying act of choosing yourself when everyone else expected you to stay in your place. I didn't need their applause. I didn't need their approval. I needed air. I needed truth. I needed myself. I made it about 10 steps from the entrance before my legs buckled a little, the adrenaline draining so fast it left me hollow. I found a stone bench near the driveway, the kind placed more for decoration than comfort, and sat heavily, my hands pressed against my knees, breathing deep. The sunset was dying over the hills, the horizon a blaze of orange and bruised purple. It looked almost too beautiful for a night like this, like the universe was mocking me with its indifference. I heard the shuffling footsteps before I saw him. Aiden, still in his ill-fitting suit, his tie loosened, his hair sticking up at odd angles like he had fought a war and barely made it out. Which, in a way, he had. He slowed as he approached, uncertainty flickering across his face. For a moment, he looked like he wasn't sure if he was allowed to sit next to me, like he was waiting for permission. I patted the bench beside me without a word. He sat, his legs swinging a little above the ground, the letter we had written together clutched tightly in his hand, crumpled and smudged now with sweat and nerves. Neither of us spoke at first. The silence wasn't awkward. It was thick with understanding, the kind of silence only people who have walked through fire together can share. Mom found us soon after, her heels dangling from her fingers, her dress slightly rumpled, her expression unreadable. She sat on my other side with a weary sigh, slipping an arm around my shoulders and pulling me into her side like she used to when I was a boy, and the world had been just as cruel. The three of us sat there as the last traces of light disappeared from the sky. The doors to the ballroom stayed shut. No one came out looking for me. No frantic footsteps. No tearful apologies. No Camilla running into the night, makeup streaked, begging for another chance. I guess some endings are quieter than others. And as much as a part of me ached, because love doesn't just switch off like a light, most of me felt lighter than I had in years. I had made the right choice. I could have stayed. I could have smiled through the humiliation, swallowed it like all the other slights and cuts and barbed words I had endured in their world. I could have clung to Camilla, convincing myself that love was supposed to hurt sometimes, that if I just tried harder, bent further, gave more, it would eventually be enough. But Aiden's voice had cracked through the illusion. My voice, echoed through him, had reminded me of who I really was. And I couldn't unhear it now. Mom squeezed my shoulder gently. "I'm proud of you," she said softly, the words brushing against my ear like a balm over fresh wounds. I blinked hard, the sudden sting in my eyes unexpected but inevitable. "I'm sorry," I said. "For everything. For letting it get this far." Mom chuckled. Not cruelly, but warmly, the sound of a woman who had survived enough heartbreak to know when to let go. "You loved her," she said simply. "That's never something to apologize for." I nodded, the lump in my throat too big to speak around. Aiden shifted beside me, kicking a pebble with the toe of his shoe. "You think she's sorry?" he asked, his voice small. I thought about it. About the look on Camilla's face when I left. Not tearful, not desperate. Just stunned. Like she hadn't thought it was possible that I might choose to walk away. "I don't know," I said honestly. "And it doesn't matter." It didn't. Her remorse, or lack of it, wasn't my burden anymore. I wasn't carrying the weight of her expectations, or her father's disdain, or anyone's shallow approval anymore. I had put it down, and in its place was something fragile but powerful, my own self-respect. I sat back against the bench, staring up at the first stars pricking through the darkening sky. For the first time in what felt like years, I let myself wonder, really wonder, what life could look like if I wasn't constantly trying to fit into someone else's world. What if I built my own? It didn't have to be grand. It didn't have to impress anyone but me. A small apartment with a leaky faucet, but a kitchen where I could cook breakfast on lazy Sunday mornings. A job that didn't make headlines but made me proud. Friends who didn't care what I drove or wore. A life where love wasn't a weapon, but a shelter. I didn't know how to get there yet. But for the first time, I believed it was possible. Mom nudged me lightly. "Come on," she said. "Let's go home." Home. Not the Vaughn mansion. Not the gleaming ballroom. The small, worn house with the sagging porch where I had learned to survive. Where survival had shaped me, yes, but hadn't broken me. Where love had never been conditional. I stood, brushing off my pants, the heavy fabric whispering against the stone bench. Aiden hopped up beside me, slipping his hand into mine like he used to when he was little. I squeezed back, anchoring him, anchoring myself. We walked toward the parking lot together, the three of us, leaving behind the ruins of the life I thought I wanted. And even though my heart still ached, even though my future was a blank page that terrified me, I smiled. Because I hadn't just walked away from Camilla. I had walked into freedom, into myself. And for the first time in a long time, that felt like enough. The night air clung to us as we made our way down the long gravel driveway, our footsteps crunching softly in the darkness. In the distance, the Vaughn estate still gleamed, lit up like a golden castle under the stars. It looked untouchable from here, perfect, towering, invincible. But I knew better now. I had seen the cracks. The ashes of what was supposed to be the perfect day drifted behind us, weightless and irrelevant. The tuxedo felt tighter on my body, like it didn't fit me anymore. Maybe it never had. The vows, the flowers, the champagne toasts, all of it burned down to nothing with a few cruel words and a truth too loud to ignore. When we reached Mom's old sedan, Aiden climbed into the back seat, his head leaning against the window, still clutching that wrinkled letter. Mom looked at me over the roof of the car, her eyes asking 1,000 questions she didn't voice. "You sure about this?" she finally asked, her voice low. I didn't hesitate. "I'm sure. No money, no name, no amount of public shaming was worth staying where love came with conditions." I slid into the front passenger seat, and Mom started the car. The engine sputtered to life with a familiar cough that made me smile despite everything. It wasn't a Rolls-Royce or a Bentley, but it was real. It was ours. We drove in silence for a long time, the kind of silence that says more than words ever could. I stared out the window, watching the manicured hedges and stone fountains blur past, giving way to less polished streets, to neighborhoods with cracked sidewalks and rusted fences and front porches sagging under the weight of real life. Home wasn't glamorous. It wasn't the sort of place that graced glossy magazines or Instagram feeds. But it was honest. It didn't pretend to be anything it wasn't. And neither would I, not anymore. When we pulled into the driveway of the house I grew up in, the porch light flickered once, then steadied, casting a warm, shaky glow over the front steps. Paint peeled from the railings. A patch of dead grass stretched stubbornly across the front yard. But to me, it looked like freedom. Aiden was the first to move, pushing open his door and trudging up the steps with heavy limbs, his shoes dragging across the porch. He didn't say anything, but as he passed, he bumped his shoulder lightly against mine, a silent show of solidarity, of love. Mom unlocked the door and stepped inside, her figure silhouetted against the dim hallway light. She didn't turn to see if I was following. She knew I would. I lingered on the porch for a moment, letting the night wrap around me like a blanket. In the distance, sirens wailed. Somewhere a dog barked. This was the soundtrack of my real life, messy, unpredictable, utterly imperfect. I stepped inside. The air smelled like old wood and fabric softener. The walls were still lined with the same faded family photos, birthdays, graduations, Christmas mornings spent in pajamas with paper crowns from cracker boxes. Proof that love, real love, didn't need a stage or an audience. I made my way to my old room, the one with the lopsided bookshelf and the window that never quite closed right. It looked smaller than I remembered, like it had shrunk over the years. Or maybe I had just outgrown the boy who used to sleep here dreaming of things he thought he needed to earn respect. I sat on the edge of the bed, the mattress springs creaking familiarly under my weight. I pulled at the knot of my tie, yanking it loose until it hung limp around my neck. In the silence, everything came rushing back at once. The humiliation, the betrayal, the aching loneliness that had crept in long before tonight's disaster. But beneath it, there was something else. Relief. Not the kind you feel when something goes your way. The deeper kind, the kind that comes from finally putting down a burden you didn't realize you had been carrying for so long. I didn't have to prove myself anymore. Not to Gregory Vaughn. Not to Camilla. Not to anyone. I belonged here. In my own skin. In my own story. I lay back against the pillows, staring up at the ceiling, my hands folded over my chest. The tuxedo jacket still clung to me, stiff and uncomfortable, like it was trying to remind me of the life I had walked away from. I shrugged it off, letting it fall to the floor with a soft thud. I wasn't their project anymore. I wasn't anyone's charity case. I was just me. Broken in some places, sure. Bruised, definitely. But not defeated. A light knock sounded at the door. "Come in," I said, my voice hoarse from everything I hadn't said earlier. Aiden poked his head in, his hair even messier now, his shirt untucked. He hesitated, then pattered across the room and sat at the foot of the bed, the crumpled letter still clutched in his hand. "I'm glad you're back," he said quietly. "Me too," I replied. And I meant it more than I could explain. He fiddled with the paper for a moment, then set it carefully on the nightstand, like it was something sacred. "You think you'll be okay?" he asked, his voice small. I thought about it. About the future that now stretched out in front of me like an unwritten book. It was terrifying. It was thrilling. It was mine. "I think," I said slowly, "for the first time in a long time, I actually have a shot." Aiden nodded like he understood. Maybe he did. Maybe, in his own way, he had already learned what it had taken me years to figure out, that sometimes surviving isn't just about staying afloat. Sometimes it's about choosing to swim towards something better, even when it terrifies you. He stood up, stretching, and shuffled toward the door. "Good night, bro," he said. "Good night, Aiden." The door clicked shut behind him, and I was alone again. But it didn't feel lonely. It felt like the first quiet breath after a long, endless scream. The ashes of the perfect picture were still smoldering somewhere far away. But here, in this small, imperfect house, something else was beginning to stir. Something real. Something strong. Me. The days after the wedding felt like walking through an abandoned battlefield. There were no more phone calls from Camilla, no text messages filled with frantic apologies, no carefully crafted explanations from her family trying to spin what happened into something more palatable. Silence filled the spaces where all the noise used to be, and surprisingly, it didn't feel empty. It felt clean. The morning after, I woke to sunlight cutting through the old blinds in my childhood bedroom. Dust floated lazily through the beams, and for a few seconds, I just lay there, disoriented. I was still in my shirt from the night before, but the jacket and tie lay discarded on the floor, like a snake shedding its skin. The tuxedo had always been a costume, anyway. I sat up slowly, my muscles aching from exhaustion that went deeper than my bones. Down the hall, I could hear Mom making coffee, the familiar clink of the pot against the burner, the scrape of a chair across the kitchen floor. Aiden's voice floated faintly from the living room, some cartoon blaring too loud, probably a rerun he'd seen 100 times but clung to for comfort. I pulled on an old sweatshirt from the closet, one that still smelled faintly of detergent and a life before all of this, and made my way into the kitchen. Mom glanced up from her mug, her face warm but cautious, like she was still measuring how much of me had come home last night and how much had been left behind on that stone bench. "You sleep at all?" she asked. "A little," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee and cradling it between my palms like an anchor. She nodded, not pushing, and for that, I loved her even more. We sat in companionable silence for a while, the clock ticking loud in the quiet house. Eventually, Aiden came bounding into the kitchen, already halfway through a bag of cereal, milk sloshing dangerously close to the rim of his bowl. He plopped down across from me and grinned, the morning sun catching in his hair, making him look impossibly young. "You're famous," he said, mouth half full. I raised an eyebrow. "What are you talking about?" He shoved his phone across the table. A video was playing, grainy, shaky, but unmistakable. It was him, standing in that ballroom, reading the letter. You could hear the nervous tremble in his voice at first, the cruel laughter dying off into stunned silence, the way the air seemed to crack open when truth hit the room like a hammer. I watched, transfixed, as strangers' comments scrolled underneath. "This kid has more courage than most adults. Respect is earned, not bought. Bravo. Money can't buy class." This family just proved it. It had gone viral overnight. Thousands of views. Thousands of shares. Thousands of strangers rallying behind a story they didn't even know they needed. I set the phone down carefully, my mind racing. "I didn't post it," Aiden said quickly. "I swear. One of the guests must have, or maybe someone from the staff." "It's okay," I said, stunned by the truth of it. "It's more than okay." For so long, I had been screaming into a void, trying to prove my worth to people who would never hear it, never see it. And now, here it was, my story echoing out into the world, being heard by people who didn't know me anything, but still understood, still respected it, still respected me. I wasn't sure what to do with that at first. It felt foreign, like touching a part of myself that had long gone numb. But slowly, I let it sink in. That day, I opened my old laptop and, for the first time in months, started writing. Not job applications. Not loan deferment forms. Not desperate, polished emails to people I thought could save me. Just writing. I wrote about the grocery store shelves I used to stock after school, about the nights Mom cried in the kitchen when she thought we were asleep, about the mornings Aiden would slip notes into my backpack telling me he was proud of me. I wrote about survival, not as something shameful, but as something fierce and beautiful. I didn't name names. I didn't need to. It wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my voice. I posted it online, expecting maybe a few likes from sympathetic strangers. Nothing more. By nightfall, it had thousands of shares. Comments poured in, people telling me their own stories of struggle, of clawing their way up from nothing, of loving themselves enough to walk away from toxic places and toxic people. Somewhere deep inside me, something shifted. Maybe it wasn't a life I had built with a mansion and a guest list full of billionaires. But it was real. It was mine. And it mattered. Over the next few days, small opportunities started to come out of nowhere. Someone offered me a guest spot on a podcast about resilience. Another person emailed asking if I would consider writing a column for an online magazine focused on real-life stories of perseverance. I said yes to all of it, not because I thought I was suddenly some kind of hero, but because if even one person out there felt less alone because of what I had survived, it was worth it. Every humiliation, every sacrifice, every broken dream. I was rebuilding, not with polished marble and chandelier light, but with truth, with grit, with the kind of strength that doesn't come from what you own, but from what you refuse to let break you. Late one night, after Mom and Aiden had gone to bed, I sat alone in the living room, scrolling through the messages, letting them fill the spaces where shame used to live. There was no bitterness left in me, no anger, just a quiet, steady kind of hope. I didn't need the vaunts. I didn't need Camilla. I needed this. My life. My story. Written by me, owned by me, lived by me. And as I shut the laptop and leaned back against the old couch, staring up at the cracked ceiling, I realized something so simple, so freeing, it made me laugh out loud. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. The days turned into weeks, and the story kept spreading like a spark carried on the wind. I would open my email every morning to find dozens, sometimes hundreds, of new messages. Some were short, just a line or two. Thank you for speaking for people like me. Others were raw, sprawling confessions of private battles fought in the shadows, escaping toxic marriages, leaving abusive jobs, finding the courage to start over after a lifetime of being told they weren't enough. Every story echoed pieces of mine, like the world was answering me back, saying, "We see you. We are you." For a while, I lived between two worlds, the quiet, worn-in life of home, chipped mugs, second-hand furniture, late-night talks with Aiden, and the roaring, unexpected noise of the internet, where my name was suddenly attached to words like inspirational and brave. It should have felt overwhelming. It should have scared me, but it didn't. Because for the first time in my life, the attention wasn't about pretending to be something I wasn't. It was about the truth, messy, cracked, beautiful truth. One afternoon, as I sat at the kitchen table answering messages, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Almost let it ring into the silence, another ghost from the past I didn't need. But something made me swipe. Hello. A pause. A breath. And then her voice. Camilla. I froze, the air thick and hard to swallow. I didn't think you'd pick up, she said, her voice smaller than I remembered. I didn't say anything. I wasn't sure there was anything left to say. I saw the video, she continued, stumbling over the words. Saw the posts. The articles. Another pause. You're everywhere. I could hear the disbelief in her tone, the faint undercurrent of something else too, regret. Maybe. Or just the shock that the man they had laughed at hadn't crumbled like they expected. I didn't think you'd actually leave, she said finally, and the words hit harder than anything else she could have thrown at me. Not I'm sorry. Not I was wrong. Just that. I didn't think you'd actually leave. Because in her world, people didn't walk away from the vaunts. They stayed. They begged. They swallowed humiliation for the privilege of proximity. She hadn't believed I would love myself more than I loved the image of us. And once upon a time, she would have been right. But not anymore. I smiled, a small, sad thing she couldn't see. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you, I said, my voice steady. I left because I finally started loving myself. Silence. For a second, I thought she might say something else, offer some grand apology or revelation. But there was just a click, a dead line, and then nothing. I stared at the phone for a moment longer, then set it down gently on the table, like laying a ghost to rest. It didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It didn't hurt at all. Instead, I felt lighter. Like I had finally closed a door that should have been shut long ago. Later that night, I sat with Aiden on the front porch, the summer air thick with the smell of cut grass and engine oil from the neighbor's car. He was scrolling on his phone, snorting at memes, occasionally showing me one and laughing like only a 14-year-old could. I watched him, grateful beyond words that he had stood up for me when I hadn't yet remembered how to stand up for myself. You know, he said casually, not looking up from his screen, you're kind of famous now. I chuckled. Yeah, well, fame doesn't pay the electric bill. He grinned. Yet, I nudged him with my elbow, and he nearly dropped his phone, laughing. In the distance, fireflies blinked lazily across the lawn, tiny beacons against the growing dark. You're gonna do something good with it, Aiden said suddenly, his voice softer now. More certain. I know you will. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the same fierce hope that had kept me alive all these years reflected in his eyes. He believed in me. He always had. And now, finally, I was starting to believe in myself too. The next morning, I accepted an offer to write a full series for a major online platform, not just a single article, but a whole collection of stories about resilience, about survival, about choosing yourself when the world tells you not to. They weren't flashy pieces. They weren't about selling a dream. They were about building something real, brick by brick, word by word. And for the first time, the applause didn't feel like a validation I needed to survive. It was just background noise. The real victory had happened already. It happened the moment I stood up, took off that ring, and walked out of a life that wasn't mine. It happened when Aiden read my words and reminded me who I was. It happened when I came home, not to a mansion, but to a place where love didn't come with a price tag. The nights were still hard sometimes. There were moments when the loneliness crept in, when the echo of Camilla's laughter haunted the corners of my mind, when doubt tried to snake its way back into my heart. But now, I had armor. Not the brittle, shiny armor of wealth and status. The real kind forged in heartbreak, in survival, and the kind of love that doesn't ask for proof. I was rebuilding from the ruins. Not to impress anyone. Not to prove anything. Just because I could. Because I deserved to. Because somewhere deep inside me, the boy who stocked grocery shelves at 12 years old, the boy who worked 2 jobs to keep the lights on, the boy who loved without condition, he deserved a life built on truth. And I was finally ready to give it to him. It was a Wednesday afternoon when I found myself sitting on the hard wooden bleachers of Aiden's high school gym, the kind of place where echoes lived longer than people and the scent of old sweat and floor polish clung to the air like a second skin. Rows of parents and students fanned out around me, murmuring, adjusting folding chairs, craning their necks to see the makeshift stage at the front where a single microphone stood like a challenge. Today wasn't about me. It was about Aiden. He had been chosen to deliver the keynote speech at the annual Student Leadership Awards, something I only found out about because he slipped the crumpled program onto the kitchen table the night before, his cheeks flushing when I asked about it. "I don't know," he had muttered. "It's no big deal." But I knew better. I knew the weight of standing in front of people, the way your heart tried to climb up your throat and your palms sweated and every inch of you screamed to run. I also knew the power of speaking anyway. So here I was, my knee bouncing with nervous energy, waiting for my little brother to step onto that stage and remind himself, and everyone else, exactly who he was. When his name was called, a ripple of applause swept the room. Aiden walked up, his steps a little stiff, his hands shaking just enough that only I would notice. He was wearing the blazer I bought him last Christmas, the sleeves a little short now, the buttons straining just slightly. He reached the microphone, cleared his throat once, and unfolded a sheet of paper with deliberate slowness. And then he began. "Respect is a right," Aiden said, his voice steady, stronger than I had ever heard it. "Not a reward." The room quieted. The restless shifting stopped. Every eye turned toward him. He talked about strength, not the kind that flexes in a mirror or shows off with bank accounts and brand names, but the quiet kind. The kind that gets up every day and tries again. The kind that walks away when staying would mean losing yourself. He talked about love, about how real love isn't measured by gifts or grand gestures, but by the small, everyday choices that say, "I see you. I choose you." He didn't mention me by name. He didn't have to. Every word was an echo of everything we had lived, everything we had survived. When he finished, the silence was so complete, it was almost sacred. And then, slowly at first, the applause began. It wasn't polite. It wasn't dutiful. It was thunderous. I was on my feet before I even realized it, clapping so hard my palms stung, my heart swelling with a pride so big it almost hurt. Aiden caught my eye across the room and grinned. Not the shy, uncertain grin he used to wear, but a full, beaming smile that said he knew exactly who he was now. I stayed after the ceremony, weaving through clusters of parents and teachers to find him. He was surrounded by a few friends, some teachers shaking his hand, congratulating him. When he finally spotted me, he slipped free and jogged over, the program still clutched in his hand. "You killed it," I said, pulling him into a hug, thumping his back. "Thanks," he said, his voice muffled against my shoulder. We pulled back, and he gave me a look. One of those rare, unguarded looks that said everything without needing words. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, and for the first time in a long, long time, I meant it. "I'm good," I said. "Better than good." We drove home with the windows down, the warm breeze threading through the car, carrying the faint scent of blooming jasmine and fresh-cut grass. Home was still the same. The cracked porch, the peeling paint, the creaky stairs. But now it felt different. It felt like the start of something. Inside, Mom had taped Aiden's program to the fridge with a magnet shaped like a smiling sun. She hugged him fiercely when we walked through the door, and I swear she was wiping at her eyes when she pulled back. That night, after everyone went to bed, I sat alone at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop. The blank document glowed softly on the screen, a silent invitation. I thought about everything. The wedding that wasn't a wedding, the toast that broke me open, the boy who stood up when I couldn't. I thought about what it meant to be a real man. And I started to type. Not for fame, not for applause, but because the words were burning inside me, too important to keep buried anymore. I wrote about how a real man isn't measured by the size of his wallet or the cut of his suit. He's measured by the way he shows up, for the people he loves, for the dreams he fights for the quiet promise he makes to himself to never settle for less than respect. He's measured by the courage to walk away when staying would mean betraying himself. He's measured by how he stands, even when standing feels impossible. I didn't stop writing until the sun began to bleed into the sky, soft and pink and full of promise. When I finally closed the laptop, I sat back and let the silence wrap around me. Not heavy anymore. Not lonely. Just full. I thought about the path ahead, still uncertain, still messy, still mine. And I smiled. Because somewhere along the way, through the ashes and the heartbreak and the quiet rebuilding, I had found something no mansion or last name could ever offer. I had found myself. And that was enough. Maybe it always had been.